Okay, Working Wellbeing podcast live, Employee Experience Expo 2026. And we have Danny Wareham with us. Welcome, Danny.
Lovely to meet you, actually in the flesh, Matt.
Yeah.
There's something strange we lose when we're on LinkedIn and on Zoom, where you just can't tell how tall somebody is. It's love to see you.
Yeah, don't tell me that, because there's someone here, Jamie Douglas. Do you know Jamie?
I've not met.
No, ex Babcock. Anyway, we're here. Yeah, he's helping us with a few things. He's going to be on the podcast later, I think. And he's about 7'5", and I didn't know that. I've only ever seen him on Teams until now. So,
I'm a bit of a munchkin, so it's never a shock when people are taller than me.
Yeah. So I have literally spotted you across the room this morning, recognized you from LinkedIn. I've probably interacted a couple of times on LinkedIn, I'm guessing, but this is the first time we've actually met in person.
It is. And it's been a pleasure so far. So, hopefully let's not derail.
So far. We've got 15, 20 minutes on this episode to hopefully not do that. I'll try my best. So, Danny, for those who don't know who you are, tell me more about yourself.
So my name's Danny Wareham. I'm an organisational psychologist, and I believe that happy bees make tasty honey. So if we create the right environment, have the right culture, the right strategy, the right support, then performance becomes a side effect of that. And as an organisational psychologist, my specialties fall into sort of two families. One is social dynamics. So how do people relate to each other, culture and engagement. And then the second is personality. What makes you you? But with a particular slant towards the dark triad of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellism.
Ooh, I love that. Tell me more. Tell me more about the dark triad.
So, where to start? Personality there's a lot of mythology around personality. People tend to conflate it with certain colours or letters, or I'm a clownfish or Hufflepuff. But actually, personality is your core, what makes you you. And it's pretty stable over time. And we now know that it's partly genetic as well. Anything that is genetic tends to have a biological benefit in some contexts. Mm-hmm. So I got really interested in what about some of these personality traits and facets that we tend to associate with maladaptive behaviors. So if somebody was to say you're a narcissist, we tend to think of maybe US presidents. But actually narcissism is like any other personality dimension, is a spectrum. Mm. So things like the need to be seen. So do you like recognition? Mm-hmm. That's a narcissistic trait.
Sure.
Are you optimistic and able to bounce back when things go wrong? That's a narcissistic trait. So there are benefits to these. And as a naturally disruptive character, I really like being interested in those kind of quirky things that other people kind of take as read, when they're maybe a little bit more complicated than that. And that fascinates me. People fascinate me. Personality fascinates me.
Got you. So we're 2 minutes in. You call me a narcissist, right? That's good. I hear you're a massive fan of disc.
Oh, yeah.
That's a joke.
Yes. I used to be a disc practitioner, and I did find it very useful at the time for giving people a vocabulary to talk about their differences. But knowing what I know now, part of the problem with DISC and its kind of scientific basis or lack thereof, I don't have a problem with people using unscientific tools to talk about differences, but use something like, let's discuss whether we like or dislike Love Island or horoscopes or crystals or phrenology or all these other things. The challenge with products like DISC and Myers-Briggs and some others are people think that they are gospel. And that can lead to people taking them as read. I'm a read, I'm more forthright and direct, and you have to deal with that. And that's not what it's about. It's about when are those behaviors that tend to be more prevalent in certain personality traits and types, when do they help and when do they hinder? And the language around some of these pseudoscientific models they tend to hinder more than they help.
Yeah, it's interesting how people are so drawn towards them, though. I guess it's the simplicity, right? We just love to be able to...
We like simple, but also we have an innate desire to know how do we fit into groups. Mm-hmm. The horoscope we know has no scientific validity, but it's in every magazine, every newspaper. Mm-hmm. Today, you can look on news sites like CNBC, for example, and you will see Mercury's in retrograde. What does that mean for Taurus? Even though it's complete BS.
Is it? No, that wasn't the question.
So that's a very Aquarius thing to say. But such is our need to know, how do we fit, how do we belong, how do we relate? And that shouldn't be poo-pooed and undermined. It should be understood a little bit better, because it all improves the way we work, the way we build relationships, our health. So that there is definitely usefulness in it. Just let's not base that usefulness on a foundation of sand.
Got it, yeah. So what alternatives? What alternative personality measurement would you...
So you're a psychologist. You know the answer to this is it depends.
Okay, yeah.
What are you trying to assess? If you're trying to assess IQ, you wouldn't use a tool that's used in selection, for example. So it really depends on what is it that I'm trying to achieve, and then what's the right tool for that. If we stick with assessment, for example, finding the right tool isn't the first place. Let's do a job analysis and find out what's required in the actual job. And then let's build our selection tools and approaches. And, should we use interviews or group approaches, or what questions should we use, etc. Are then based on what is it that we're trying to spot as a predictable behavior when we're selecting talent. So yeah, don't start with a tool. It's no good going, I've got an amazing hammer, if the hammer isn't the right tool for the job.
Yeah. That was a good answer. It's the right answer. I love it. I was going to ask you about your book, because you recently published a book, right? All about leadership. Can you tell me more? Or leadership or that lack thereof. Maybe.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. So when I was doing my academic research, I looked into leadership and found that, as is typical with academics, we can't agree on anything. We don't have a definition of culture. We don't have a definition of leadership. What we did find is that there are some commonalities between almost all leadership models, in that a leader is always a person. A leader sets the directions of that kind of vision or goal or mission or the way that we're heading. And a leader is disproportionately influential in what are the tolerated behaviors of how we do things around here. So kind of culture. So my sort of thought experiment was, if the group knows what they're there to achieve, and they understand both the implicit and the explicit rules of how do we get things done, then does a leader need to be a person at all? And that took me down a little bit of a rabbit hole of lots of examples in the real world where we don't have a traditional leader barking orders or directing or setting visions. So for example, if there was an earthquake now, then we would coalesce around a central goal, which is we need to save lives. Now, you're a young, fit gent. I don't know if you're on camera now, so you just have to take my word for it. Yeah. But you're younger than fitter than me. It may be that the best way that you can contribute towards that goal is you're off moving rubble and saving lives. I'm a little bit more portly, but I've got a full battery on my phone and a large network. So I'd be ringing, trying to get emergency services and help. So you lean into the strengths that help you contribute towards that shared goal. I lean into the ones that help me contribute to that shared goal. Nobody organized that. Nobody was assigning tasks and jobs. So this happens in the real world an awful lot. Who's the leader of your family? Well, if it's directions, it might be my wife. If it's putting a shelf up, it might be me. If the Wi-Fi goes down, it might be one of the kids that's kind of fixing it. So leadership is this sort of fluid, dynamic, ad hoc and moving relational thing, rather than a person at the top of the tree. But the thing that was interesting was that it had not been studied before, despite feeling very self-evident to me. So my academic research was trying to test when could you take the leader out of the room and the performance would not only dip, but could improve. And that became the basis for Constellation. So it's not leaderless leadership. Culture becomes the leader. What is it that informs your decisions, your appetite for risk, your language, your behaviors? And can that be influential enough to guide a group towards a shared goal or shared commitment?
Got you. So when you're talking about this, my mind, obviously, given my bias, immediately jumps to well-being, right? And one of the things that we're seeing recently is a real push about the importance that line managers play when it comes to well-being. What is it? People don't leave organizations, they leave managers. 70% of engagement scores are driven by the relationship of a line manager, which all makes sense. But the risk is the pendulum swings too far and it all becomes the leader's fault, and the leader's problem. And, you've got people who are in these positions, it's a well-worn cliche, but it's true, who have developed because of technical skill, not necessarily human skill. And they're now expected to have mental health conversations with people, well-being conversations with people. And what are you suggesting here? Are you suggesting that perhaps you don't necessarily need that person to be the figurehead for all that responsibility? There might be someone else within the team, within the culture?
So again, it depends is going to be the answer. So for me, there's two sides. One is that Constellation leadership is not advocating for getting rid of leaders. What
Okay.
it's saying is there are times when you need leaders. There are times when you need somebody to take the helm and set the goals, etc. So, for example, if you take the army plan and plan and plan before any sort of mission. Even if the mission is in peacetime, they plan for every contingency. However, during the mission, because it's very clear to the group what's the intent and what's the motive, so why are we here and what are we trying to achieve, that allows the individuals within that group to have some autonomy to contribute in every way they want. So first thing is leadership's not completely leaderless all the time.
Sure.
The second thing is that I don't think there's a silver bullet to solving well-being issues in work. There might be silver buckshot, lots of little things that can be done, but putting all of the emphasis on it's the leader-follower relationship or the relationship with your manager kind of scapegoats other things that are in your organization. So how clunky your process is, how much emotional labor is involved in masking your feelings, dealing with a customer who's irate and angry, but you have to remain calm and professional. So there isn't a simple silver bullet type fix. But what constellation leadership does is it looks at the kind of systemic, it looks at leadership in a systemic way. And the way to kind of think of it is there's lots of studies about purposefully engaged employees being better for the business. So 62% fewer absences, 2.5 times more productivity, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also studies that show that purposefully engaged employees at all levels of a business are more likely to put their bins out for the neighbours. They're more likely to donate their time to charity. And the reverse is also true. Disengaged employment correlates, but not necessarily as a causation, towards family breakdowns, death, domestic violence. So my view is that employers rent their employees from their families. They have a duty of care to return them in a better condition. And if you look at the system in which people work, rather than just our manager or our process or an environmental factor, and instead look at what are we here to achieve and what can you contribute towards that, rather than what are we here to achieve and here's your little piece that you do and you stay in your lane and you have to sometimes mask who you are and it's not completely inclusive, that is a recipe towards stress and well-being impacts. So it's a bit of a too long didn't read is constellation leadership is not completely leaderless. What it does is look at it as a systemic factor that improves outcomes for well-being, for being purposefully engaged, for feeling that you are seen and your contributions are valid. And also that you can bring all of the tools from your van and contribute them towards something, not just what's in your job description.
Got you. Makes sense. So, I've not read the book yet. I will, I promise, because it does sound so really genuinely. It was on my to-read list. I will get it. But I'm assuming there's examples in the book of where this works really well, right? And there's a real strong case for it. It leads to higher performance and all the rest of it. Why then do we have the aforementioned President of the United States and others like him? We still have this great man theory that still exists at the top of lots of large institutions and organizations.
It's a great question. And again, there are a couple of potential reasons. So first of all, in a crisis, we tend to look for a great man to kind of helm us. And we're living in a world, I believe, where there are lots of crises, but also there are manufactured crises as well. Incompetent leadership leads to more crises, which then ironically means we look to incompetent leaders to kind of guide us out of this. But more locally, at a kind of organizational level, how do you align the expectations, the behaviors and approaches if you don't know what you're aligning them to? There are a huge amount of businesses that don't have that kind of North Star direction, vision kind of thing. They know what they do, and they might have visions that are not aspirational, that are actually more like mission. So we want to be the number one widget maker in the UK by 2025. Or we want to have a certain number of people from a certain demographic on our board by 2026. These are measurable milestones. They're not visions, they're not aspirations. They're not something that we can have an emotional attachment and get behind and therefore bring more of ourselves to work to contribute towards it. So instead, you create almost a production line approach of, this is just my job. It's a 9 to 5. I'm now going to be called a quiet quitter because I just come in and do my job. And all of those arguments grow arms and legs, but it's not because of the manager. It's not because of the employee. It's because the organization and the system doesn't have a direction. It doesn't have an aspirational, what are we here to achieve? What is our legacy? What's the world we want to leave behind? What's the difference we want to make?
Yeah.
And then you get transactional relationships behind it.
Got yeah. Does your book and your ethos advocate the creation of that mission? Do you think that comes from leadership, or do you think that's co-created through the business?
There's a common theme here that it depends.
Yeah.
So the way the book is set up, as a bit of backstory, I'm an idealist. When I first got into business on my own, I was talking about, let's have leaderless leadership and can't we all get along, and a rising tide raises all boats and kind of things. And then I went to a HR forum with local business leaders from some quite large businesses, and someone was demonstrating a 2x2 Johari window for performance versus potential and a way to categorize employees. Now we know that is not a great model to use. It's overly simplistic. But the thing was, people in the room were really mesmerized by it. Can I get a copy of the slides? Can I have that? So I have to be conscious that although I'm an idealist, I live in a real world. So the way the book was written is in kind of 3 sections. The first section is how did we get here? So we talk about things like great man and trait theory, and right the way through to sort of today's distributed leadership models. And we talk about what culture is and what culture isn't, and psychological safety. The second section is then here's the academic research delivered in a way that's hopefully quite accessible. Because again, academic stuff, particularly in psychology, can be a little bit almost classist and inaccessible. And then the third section is, don't take Danny's John Lennon, imagine all the people kind of view of it. Here are some real organizations that are using it today. And there's 7 case studies that are in there, and all of them share some commonalities between how they make it work. The first is they all know where they're going, all of them. That allows for more autonomy. The second is they have high levels of trust, and that allows that autonomy to actually be used and not have, for example, there's a thing called awestruck syndrome, which is where you have somebody who's very good at what they do who offers to empower their employees, and the employees don't act quickly enough or don't take the rein, so the great man ends up doing it anyway, which then reinforces almost the learned helplessness behind it. Organizations that are able to distribute leadership around are able for their leaders to have the self-awareness to step back and know when they're causing part of the bottleneck themselves. So where am I going? And then how do I create the environment to allow people to contribute purposefully towards that? And that's that motive and intent that we see in Mission Command in the armed services, for example.
Yeah, got you.
Does that answer the question? Because that was a very long one.
I think so.
Yeah. There is a tried and tested model, but all based on what is your vision? What's that aspiration of the world you want to leave? What do you want to be famous for? Then how do you know you're on that mission, on that vision? Well, that's your missions, that's your measurable steps. And then what are the behaviors that are going to make it more likely? If you imagine a workplace that's fun and exciting, and there's a vibe in the air, and there's dogs in the office, and it's dress down Friday, we all go to the pub together, and on a Wednesday we've got a big inflatable grab a grand machine, and we can snatch gift vouchers out of the air, our best performers. Is that the sort of place you want to work? That's a terrible funeral directors.
Yeah.
What are the behaviors that make your organizational strategy more likely to be achieved, including its wellbeing strategy? And then how do you create the processes, the protocols, and the behaviors that encourage those to manifest more frequently? They can't align behaviors if you don't know what you're aligning them to. Yeah. You just end up doing things that you think are the right thing to do, and they can inadvertently cause strategic and cultural drift.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Something you've mentioned a couple of times, authenticity, bringing your whole self to work. What if you're a dickhead?
So I'm not sure. We'll have to check the tape if I actually said authenticity, because you may have noticed I'm a bit of a soapbox ranter around certain things. Authenticity, I'm not a fan of.
Okay.
For a couple of reasons. One is, in my experience, most people say, I'm just bringing my authentic self to work, are a dickhead. It becomes a license to thing you need to know about me is I'm blunt and no.
I'm a red, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Diplomacy, there is a reason we have diplomacy as a social tribal species. The second thing is, I don't think it exists. So if you think of how you behave around a client, what's your language like? How do you dress? How do you hold yourself? Do you think before you speak? that is very different to how you would be with your friends on a Friday night. And that would be very different again with how you are with your family on a Saturday. And that would be different again if you're at a funeral with a load of strangers on the Monday. So that kind of social identity theory of us taking on part of our identity based on the groups that we're a part of, culture influences how we show up. But in all of those scenarios, you think you're being you. You think you're being authentic. But to an observer, your behaviors, your appetite for risk, how you manage change, the languages are very different. So it's not just a kind of theoretical, ideological view. I don't think authenticity is a useful thing. And it tends to mask maladaptive behaviors because I'm a red. You just need to take it or leave it. And it's up to you to modify your behavior. It's up to you to be inauthentic to deal with my authenticity. That's what you're saying. And it just feels a bit BS.
Got you. Well, look, you mentioned BS there. I feel like there's a whole future episode where we could just talk about the BS that exists within psychology, but we won't necessarily pull on that thread just now.
We've only got 20 minutes or so, haven't we?
We're just over the time, so we better wrap it. But is there any questions you kind of wish I'd asked you? Is there anything in front of mind that you're excited about at the moment?
What a great question. I think in my world, particularly in culture, there's a lot of businesses that think they'll do culture after they've done the business. So once we've got a certain turnover, or once we're at a certain level of success, or once we're at a certain headcount, then we'll look at our people stuff. I'm just wondering if it's almost like culture's a bolt-on rather than a strategic tool. I'm wondering if you see the same...
Or culture's an emergent...
Yeah,
something that just emerges.
It's by default. And it is, to be fair. But I'm wondering if in the well-being world, you see that organizations are kind of bolting it on after they've done the businessy bit, or are they seeing it as actually... I'll share a stat with you. Gallup last year, the State of the Workplace report, only 18% of employees are purposely engaged. If you had a machine that was only operating at 18% of its capacity, you would invest in that machine. So I'm wondering, in the wellbeing world, where we're seeing people that are more prone to factors and stress, and we've just seen the first fines issued in the UK 2 weeks ago for stress risk management assessments not being done. I'm wondering, do you see wellbeing still being bolted on, or is there a move to having it more baked in to people's strategies?
They want it to be more baked in. Am I actually seeing it? Do I see it day to day? Not as much as you'd like it to be. And that's always my slight existential crisis. That makes no sense, does it? That I have from time to time is, I've been to events like today, 15 years ago, where people were standing up on stage and they were saying, well-being's going to be taken really seriously. It's got a place at the top table. The board are going to care about it, And then we're here again 15 years later, and there's people saying, organizations are going to take it seriously. It's a system, not an individual thing. And we're kind of still talking about it. And there is a point where I'm like, when are we going to stop talking about it and actually do it? And I guess fundamentally, you've got to believe, you talked about the mission and the outcome, that well-being is almost as much of the mission as performance and revenue. Now, I see those two things as not mutually exclusive, that they help one another. But whether or not organizations truly believe that, it's always in my experience comes slightly second to the numbers on the finance spreadsheet.
In the book and in my world, the biggest challenge I see in well-being is, what's the delta between what you say and what you do? Do you walk your talk? I, like you, I'm sure, would like to see more organizations do what they say. We're not here to challenge what you say. If you want to be profitable, make money, and that's it, great, you do that. You be like Twitter. But do you walk your talk? Because when you don't, that spills over into kitchens, classrooms, and communities.
And actually, sorry, I was having a conversation last week about this. You almost wouldn't mind if an organization said that our well-being approach is a PR exercise. So if they said, yes, we've got a slide in the office and we've got, yoga on a Friday and all the rest, all these things that get bad mouths by proper well-being professionals. But if they said, that's because we want the brand to be cool and for it to be like quite a cool place to work and all the rest of it, and that's it. We're not looking for this to be like the thing that solves people's mental health problem or stops that happening in the future. No. Like that's it. You'd almost be like, all right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because actually I'm a big believer that you can have both. You should be doing the proper system level stuff to stop people burning out and so on. But also you can have the, if you like, soft and fluffy things. Because if you think about it, if you know anybody who works for one of these organizations, they're not telling you about what great email etiquette they've got that stops them getting too many emails. They tell you about the slide they got in the office and how cool it is. And they had puppies the other day that came, so
There is.
I feel that there's space for both, but where it becomes difficult is where an organization says we really care about the well-being of our employees, and what they mean is that they've got the slide and they're not doing any of the system level stuff.
Our psychological contract is built on the dream. What do you say you're about? And love or loathe Musk, for example, he says if you're going to work at X, you're going to be berated. You are going to be sleeping in the office. It's going to be a dog-eat-dog, pound of flesh kind of work. Great. That means I can now make an informed decision of whether that's for me or not. So it's not a toxic workplace. He's delivering exactly what he says. Sure. But how many organizations pretend to be Richard Branson but are actually Elon Musk? And that delta between what you say and what you do now means that at an individual level, you're asking me to behave in a way that's incongruent with my values, and that emotional labor leads to stress and the well-being and burnout, fatigue, and all these kind of things. Do you walk your talk?
Great place to finish. I'm sure we could talk about that for many more hours, but we'll have to call it there. My last question for you: Where can people find you? Give yourself a plug.
So they can find me. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Apparently, that's where all the cool kids are. I'm not sure if I count as a cool or a kid anymore. But LinkedIn, I think I'm the only Danny Wareham. They can also find me at dannywareham.com or at my consultancy, which is Firgun, Firgun.
Ace. Lovely speaking to you today, and hopefully see you on a future episode.
It's lovely to meet you in person again. Thank you, Matt.